Picture this: a frail, feverish man in a military tent on the Danube frontier. Around him, the air smells of incense. Outside, soldiers murmur. Inside, the Emperor Marcus Aurelius stares at his reflection and thinks, where are they now? He imagines the faces of emperors and loved ones, and answers himself, nowhere, only bones and dust. That is the final scene of a ruler who spent a lifetime training his mind for that one solitary hour. Marcus did not become calm by accident. He practiced. He journaled. He argued against his worst impulses. He learned exercises, many of them recognizable to modern psychotherapy, that helped him steer an empire through plague, war, betrayal, and loss. In the next few minutes, we're going to walk Marcus's path. The life story that turned a Roman boy into the philosopher-emperor, the Stoic techniques he used, and the practical exercises you can apply to your life tomorrow. By the end, you'll have a set of tools for worry, pain, anger, loss, and fear, directly inspired by Marcus's life and the ancient Stoic school. Let's start where the book begins. Chapter 1. The Dead Emperor. Marcus Aurelius dies far from Rome, in a military camp on the cold northern frontier of the empire. The man who rules the known world does not die in marble halls or surrounded by ceremony, but in a tent, weakened by illness, while soldiers wait outside. This moment is not accidental or ironic. It is the natural conclusion of a life spent preparing for impermanence. From an early age, Marcus trained himself to think clearly about death, not in a morbid way, but in a practical one. He treated death as a fact of nature, no different from birth or change of seasons. Throughout his life, he reminded himself that everything he loved, his body, his power, his family, even Rome itself, was temporary. This habit did not make him cold. It made him steady. Stoicism taught Marcus to rehearse loss in advance. Each stage of life was treated as a kind of death. Childhood ended. Youth ended. Peace ended. Health faded. By accepting these transitions consciously, he weakened the shock they carried. When the final moment arrived, it was not unfamiliar territory. He had already visited it many times in thought. At the core of this chapter is a discipline Marcus practiced daily, imagining adversity before it arrived. By picturing illness, exile, humiliation, or death, he removed their power to surprise him. Fear feeds on uncertainty. Stoic practice replaces uncertainty with preparation. When the mind knows what to expect, it responds with reason instead of panic. Marcus's calm at death was not bravery in the dramatic sense. It was familiarity. Death was simply another event in accordance with nature. And because he had trained his judgment for decades, the moment did not overthrow him. Chapter 2. The Most Truthful Child in Rome. Marcus's character was shaped long before he wore the purple cloak of an emperor. Born into privilege, he could easily have become indulgent or arrogant. Instead, he grew up in a household that prized sincerity, restraint, and moral seriousness. He was given a nickname Verissimus, the most truthful, because of his plainness and honesty. As a child, Marcus preferred the company of philosophers to entertainers. He adopted simple clothing and habits, even when luxury was available. This was not forced discipline. It reflected an early attraction to inner order rather than external display. His tutors, many of them Stoics, trained him to watch his thoughts carefully and to speak with precision. Language, for Marcus, was not decoration. It was a tool for governing the mind. Vague words produced vague thinking. Clear words produced clear judgments. This is why his private notes, later known as meditations, are short, blunt, and repetitive. They are not literary performances. They are mental corrections. Marcus learned that emotional disturbance usually begins with careless inner speech. When we say, "This is unbearable," we have already exaggerated the situation. When we say, "This is unfair," we have assumed the universe owes us something. Stoic training teaches you to strip events down to their raw facts before reacting. By learning to describe experiences accurately, Marcus learned to govern himself. The boy trained in truthful speech grew into a ruler capable of honest self-examination. His power over an empire rested on his power over his own judgments. Chapter 3. Contemplating the Sage, How to Speak Wisely. Marcus did not try to invent virtue from scratch. He studied living examples. His teachers, men like Rusticus, Apollonius, and the writings of Epictetus, showed him what wisdom looked like in action. From one he learned discipline, from another patience, from another emotional restraint without cruelty. This chapter shows how Stoicism is transmitted through imitation. Marcus begins his meditations by listing what he learned from others: modesty, endurance, generosity, seriousness. Gratitude is his starting point. Before correcting himself, he acknowledges his teachers. Rather than asking abstract questions about morality, Marcus asked practical ones. How would a wise person respond here? What would just person say now? This method simplified ethical decisions. He did not need to debate endlessly. He needed to align himself with an internal model of virtue. Speech plays a crucial role here. Marcus trained himself to speak slowly, calmly, and deliberately. Hastiness was treated as a moral weakness. Words spoken in anger were words spoken without judgment. Silence, when chosen consciously, was often wiser than speech. By contemplating the sage, Marcus learned to borrow stability before fully possessing it himself. Over time, imitation hardened into habit. Habit became character. Chapter 4. The Choice of Hercules, How to Conquer Desire. The Stoics often return to the myth of Hercules standing at a crossroads. One path promises pleasure, comfort, and ease. The other offers hardship, discipline, and virtue. Marcus took this myth seriously, not as a story, but as a daily decision repeated in small forms. As emperor, Marcus had access to limitless indulgence. Instead, he reminded himself constantly that luxury adds nothing to character. Fine food becomes waste. Silk becomes rags. Applause fades into silence. When desire is examined closely, it loses much of its glamour. Stoicism does not demand the rejection of all pleasure. It teaches a hierarchy of value. Health, wealth, reputation, and comfort are preferred in difference. They are acceptable, but not necessary. Virtue alone determines the worth of a life. Marcus practiced voluntary simplicity to weaken desire's grip. He slept on hard surfaces, ate plain food, and dressed modestly. These were not acts of punishment, but exercises in freedom. If you can live without something, it cannot control you. The real danger of desire, Marcus believed, was not wanting things, but believing happiness depends on getting them. Once that belief is removed, desire becomes manageable. You may pursue what is reasonable, but you remain unenslaved by outcomes. Standing at Hercules' crossroads is not a one-time event. It appears every day in how we respond to temptation, praise, comfort, and ambition. Marcus chose the harder path repeatedly, not because it was painful, but because it preserved his inner independence. Chapter 5. Grasping the Nettle, How to Tolerate Pain. Pain enters Marcus Aurelius's life early and never truly leaves it. He suffers from chronic illness, physical weakness, and repeated personal loss. Later, as emperor, he endures years of military hardship, long marches, poor living conditions, and the emotional strain of constant responsibility. Stoicism does not promise him escape from pain. Instead, it teaches him how to meet pain without surrendering his reason. Marcus learns to separate pain itself from the story the mind builds around it. The body experiences sensations, heat, pressure, fatigue, illness, but the mind often adds fear, resentment, and despair. Stoic discipline focuses on stripping pain down to its bare components. When pain is described accurately and without exaggeration, it becomes more tolerable. He repeatedly reminds himself that pain cannot damage his moral character unless he allows it to do so. The body may suffer, but judgment remains free. This distinction becomes a source of strength. Pain is treated as information, not as a verdict on life's fairness. Stoics also practiced voluntary discomfort to prepare for unavoidable hardship. Marcus deliberately chose simple living, even when luxury was available. Cold, hunger, and fatigue were not enemies, but training partners. By experiencing discomfort on his own terms, he reduced his fear of it when it arrived uninvited. Over time, Marcus comes to see endurance not as grim resistance, but as cooperation with nature. Pain rises and falls like a wave. When it is not fought or dramatized, it loses much of its power. What remains is a quiet confidence. This, too, can be born. Chapter 6, The Inner Citadel and War of Many Nations, How to Relinquish Fear. Marcus rules during one of the most unstable periods in Roman history. The empire faces foreign invasions, internal revolts, and devastating plagues. Fear is a constant presence. Yet Marcus refuses to let external chaos dictate his inner state. He develops the idea of the inner citadel, a mental stronghold that cannot be breached by events. The inner citadel rests on a single principle. Some things are within our control, and some are not. Our judgments, intentions, and actions belong to us. Everything else, other people's behavior, political outcomes, illness, reputation, does not. Confusing these categories is the root of anxiety. When generals betray him or provinces revolt, Marcus responds without panic. He assesses facts, decides what action is reasonable, and accepts whatever outcome follows. Fear dissolves when effort is focused only where it matters. This discipline does not make Marcus passive. On the contrary, it sharpens action. By abandoning worry over uncontrollable outcomes, he becomes more decisive. The mind fortified by the inner citadel can act firmly without desperation. Fear, Marcus learns, is a demand for certainty in an uncertain world. Stoicism replaces that demand with trust in one's ability to respond well, regardless of circumstances. The citadel stands not by controlling the world, but by refusing to surrender judgment to it. Chapter 7, Temporary Madness, How to Conquer Anger. Anger, for Marcus Aurelius, is one of the most dangerous emotions, not because it is powerful, but because it masquerades as reason. Anger claims to be justice, strength, or moral clarity, when in reality it is a loss of self-command. Marcus encounters endless provocations, betrayal by close allies, false accusations, incompetence, and disrespect. Each incident presents a choice: react immediately or pause and examine the judgment forming beneath the emotion. Stoic training teaches Marcus that anger begins with a belief that someone has intentionally harmed him or violated what he deserves. When that belief is questioned, anger weakens. Often, people act out of ignorance, fear, or weakness rather than malice. Instead of lashing out, Marcus practices delay. He reminds himself that time reveals truth and that harsh words spoken in anger cannot be recalled. Justice, he believes, requires clarity, not heat. He also reflects on human nature. People are imperfect, prone to error, and driven by misguided beliefs. Expecting otherwise is unreasonable. When expectations align with reality, anger has little ground to stand on. By treating anger as a temporary madness rather than a moral necessity, Marcus preserves his authority and his peace. Control of the self proves more powerful than control over others. Chapter 8, Death and the View from Above, How to Relinquish Fear of Death. Death occupies Marcus's thoughts more than any other subject, not because he fears it, but because he seeks to understand it clearly. He reminds himself daily that everything which exists is already in the process of passing away. Resistance to this truth creates suffering. Acceptance brings freedom. One of Marcus's most powerful mental practices is the view from above. He imagines rising high above his own life, seeing cities shrink, borders dissolve, and generations replace one another. From this height, personal troubles lose their exaggerated importance. The exercise does not minimize life's value. It restores proportion. Ambition, resentment, and fear all appear small when placed against the vast movement of time and nature. Marcus also reframes death as a return rather than a loss. Just as birth brought him into the world without his consent, death will carry him out according to nature's order. Neither event is shameful or tragic in itself. By accepting death fully, Marcus frees himself to live well. Each action gains clarity when performed with the awareness that time is limited. Gratitude replaces clinging. Purpose replaces fear. For Marcus Aurelius, the contemplation of death is not an escape from life, but the foundation of a life lived with dignity, calm, and courage. Practical, guided exercise, view from above. Close your eyes for 2 minutes. Imagine rising up over your town, then your country, then the planet. See the web of events and people. Notice how small your daily worries appear. Return and ask, which of my worries deserve the energy I'm giving them? Bridging ancient Stoic practices with modern therapy. Donald Robertson's book carefully connects Stoic exercises to modern cognitive behavioral therapy. The similarities are striking. Cognitive distancing, behavioral experiments, and value clarification all echo the Stoic toolbox. Marcus's Meditations reads like a journal of therapeutic homework. So how do we package this for daily life? Here's a simple Stoic routine you can follow. Morning, 5 to 10 minutes. Premeditatio malorum. Imagine challenges and rehearse calm responses. Set one virtue intention for the day: patience, courage, honesty. Throughout the day, when upset, use objective representation. Describe facts, not narrations. Use boundary calibration. Focus on what is up to you. Evening, 10 minutes. Journaling, short notes on what you did well, where you failed, and what you'll practice tomorrow. Marcus wrote similar notes to himself to keep his character sharpened. Common misunderstandings and objections. 2 quick confusions people have about Stoicism. Stoics are unemotional robots. Not true. Marcus wept at funerals and loved deeply. Stoicism does not deny feeling. It teaches how not to be dominated by destructive emotions. Stoicism demands ruthless self-denial. Also false. Stoics recognize preferred indifference, health, friends, and a comfortable life, so long as these do not override virtue. Living like Marcus without the purple robes. Near the end of his life, Marcus reminds himself that he has already died many times, through transitions, battles, and losses. That practice left him able to die well. You don't need an empire to apply Marcus's lessons. You need a few minutes each day and the willingness to examine your judgments. So, the next time worry strikes, pause. Name the thought. Ask, is this up to me? Practice the view from above. Pretend you're Marcus for an hour, journaling, rehearsing, and acting with the small, steady virtues.